Haidong! In this video, we're going to talk about basics. One nice thing about the Federation is that if you, again, are taught properly and all that fun stuff, you can actually do a good amount of, Federation-y stuff at your own training, right? At your own time, right? So obviously things that involve another person, like sparring and all that fun stuff, probably not, right? But your basics, right? They're all mostly standardized. The kyakgum, the forms, skills drills like throw cutting and candle extinguishing, all of those you can do at your own leisure. So that's one nice thing about the Federation that other martial arts don't have as much. But you always want to remember that, so we're talking about the Federation basics. That doesn't mean that's going to be everything you need to know in order to fight. The way these videos are going to be structured is going to be, I'm more or less going to do about 15 minutes worth of general kind of instruction as we go through the basics and all that fun stuff. So it's going to be more broken down into, again, the order, and basically like about 15 minutes or so. So again, it's not by like priority or anything like that. There's just going to be a few concepts here and there that, again, I've seen throughout, from student to student, instructor to instructor, that I'd just like to give to you guys, because sharing is caring, so long as it's not COVID. So with that, let's just get started. So I'm assuming you're going to start off class with this, right? So we just bowed in, you're in chariot position, right? So again, always start with chariot, right? So one thing to keep in mind, this depends more on the type of instructor you want to be, the type of school that you want to have. So for example, like if you want everything to be always just so, right? This is a good thing, right? So you can have your students always in the chariot position, right? Because that means they are actively waiting for instruction, right? So if you're here, again, we'll have a brief breakdown. So depending on how your school wants to have their sword oriented, I like to have my school oriented such that the bottom of the sword is honed in on the center line. You can have a semi-closed fist. So it's not straight down, it's a little bit tucked back, right? So it's a little bit below the buttock, right? The reason for that is your chest is going to be a little bit more open, you can see a little bit more, you're a little more straight up. And this is just a good position for people to be in order to receive information, right? And again, your feet are together, your eyes are forward, you want to be able to see everything, right? So within like this position, you want to be able to see everything, and just be listening. So then from here, chumbi, chumbi. So you're going to close your fist and have it near your hip. So what you can do, that's according to the blue book, you can also have the middle knuckle out a little bit more. So this is for like when you eventually go to the open hand and you're aiming for like nerve centers and stuff like that. So you have that little bit you can actually strike. Or you can have just a normal fist. I tend to have a normal fist just because I don't usually do nerve center stuff. So from chariot to chumbi. So chumbi! So all your students should say chumbi. So the first thing you're going to do is go down into kimase. So there are a couple ways we can do that, right? So the way that's usually taught, I'm going to move back a little bit more so you can see my feet. I'm going to move up a little bit more once I show you, just because I won't be up against the wall. We're going to move, I'm going to get a little more center. You're going to move your toes out for 1, heels out, toes, heel, right? So this is going to be allegedly the kimase distance. So usually what happens is down to kimase, ready, hana, tul, set, net, and down your kimase. Some other schools do this, just because there are 4 syllables in Haidong Gumdo. They do Haidong Gumdo, right? So what you can do is start with that, right? So again, if this is like one of the first time you have like white belt or something like that, this is fine, right? So from here, again, chumbi, down to kimase, ready, hana, tul, set, net, right? And from here, make sure again both feet are, so the toes should be slightly inward, knees should be slightly bent in, hips are back, chest is open, and you're here. So at this point, I can just let my students sit there and be like, all right, what's the purpose of kimase? And they're like, yep. So the purpose of kimase, or at least my interpretation of the purpose, because you're not going to fight in this per se, right? So the purpose of this is going to be, it's activating all the good muscle groups you should feel when you're sorting, right? So your thighs, your glutes, your lower back, the lower portion of your abdomen, all of that should be active when you're in a good kimase. One thing that I've actually heard that kind of helps a little bit. So while you're in kimase, right? So if, first of all, your toes are open and I try to throw a heavy weight, I'm going to fall over this way, right? So versus the toes are in, kind of like the way you kind of brake when you're skiing. You have your toes slightly in. I've never skied. That's what I've heard. So if you have your toes slightly in, and I try to throw my weight forward, I'm naturally going to brake. Brake as in stop, as opposed to break in half. But another thing that happens is, if you take a look, you can almost think about at your tail, almost like the third leg of a tripod, right? So here, you're actually going to use this extra mass in the way back to compensate the mass of your sword going forward. So that's just a couple things I like to throw at my students. Again, if this is the first time they've done it in a long time, right? So like, for example, we had a pandemic, we recently reopened, so I'm going back through these basics, right? So this is a good thing to keep in mind, right? So if you're here, knees bent in, hips back, chest forward, and sink. And from this position, you can also do the meditation portion as well. But we're doing basics, right? So we're here. What we're going to do is palto, or draw. You're going to turn the blade on a 45, grab, keep your elbow tucked in, draw forward on the ankle, pinky ring middle, clear, grab, and choke. Right. So at this point, so we can do that a few more times. But for me, for my students, is you can switch, go straight into that kimase. So instead of always doing hana, tu, set, net. If you know your distance, you can be opposite a little bit. Just draw palto. Kenjok. If I'm teaching this to a new student, right? So if I just got a new student, we're showing them kimase. Another thing we're going to do at this point is talk about the different positions of defense. So this is our middle guard, right? So obviously at this point we're in kimase, right? But just for now, because this will be a little more relaxed. It's like, all right, so we have this kenjok, right? So in general, these are things I'm going to be looking for if I'm either visiting another school, right? Kind of seeing how their students do, watching other masters, especially if I'm in the position where I'm supposed to be instructing those masters. This is one thing that I'm going to be looking for. So think about where the tip of the sword is supposed to be. So this is going to be different according to what style of application you're going for. But in general, for the Federation, you want that tip of the sword to be honed in on your opponent's throat, right? So the canonical Federation defense is a little bit more what I call a long guard. I mean long guard because I'm reaching more out, versus what I call a short guard, which is down here. Both of these have very specific reasons, but we can discuss that a little bit, right? So if we're in short guard, that means I have to generate a lot of like short range cuts. So this is closer to a kendo guard, so I can do like a kote strike or something like that. It's a little bit more like self-generation. Long guard is usually more deflection, right? So I get knocked offline, I can counter pretty happily, right? If I need to deflect, I can come up deflecting this way. So this is a lot more defensive position. It's not that great for offense as much. So again, if I'm teaching to a new student, I talk about the short and long, and where at least my students are going to be, we're going to be in the middle guard, right? So if this is short, that's long, we want to be here, right? So this way we get the best of both worlds, right? So we can actively use a little more for our thrust, we can do a little more twisting strikes, we can defend if we need to. So this is where I go a little bit sideways from the Federation, just because I like to fight again a lot more, so this is just something we're doing. This is a good thing for you to talk to your students about, right? Because inevitably, a good student should ask, why? Right? It's like, why are we doing this? So if we're just like, oh, just do this, they're going to do weird things, right? So it's like, oh, extend out? No, right? Because so first of all, that's going to hurt your neck, and also just doesn't, it ruins the purpose of that long guard. So versus, if you tell them like, all right, so I want to be in the position that if they just walk into it, they're getting stabbed in the throat. And if I need to, if I get hit offline, I can counter very happily. Like, okay, I can hold this position pretty well. Another thing that I usually mention at this point is that angle here. So this is 3 pi over 4, or about 135 degrees, right? So you want to have a nice, strong left hand, because again, this is probably again where I'm going to mention, the left hand should be our powerhouse versus our right hand is going to be like the dexterous or like the directional aspect of it. So if we're here, right, and we're really extending and we do this with our wrist, left hand has absolutely no power. Likewise here, look at that angle, also not great. Here. So that's why I like this particular defense, but if you're a lot more into like the old school or what the Federation specifically wants, you're going to be doing this. Which again is fine so long as you understand what they want, right? Because the Federation is a lot more about deflection, redirection, as opposed to straight on power versus power. So long as you know that, we can keep going with in terms of our kimase. So we're here, so we just discussed our defense. So 청영 패기, center cuts, right? So you're going to bring it back and cut. So at this point, there are a couple things I want to clarify. So back in the day, so probably when you first learned how to do a center cut, you were told to do tip the tailbone, right? Tip the tailbone and then throw the cut out. So this has actually been confirmed by the Federation that this is a prototype. This is intended for white belts to learn symmetry, right? Because if I just go, just cut someone in the head, they kind of like do this kind of thing, right? And they don't really know where they're hitting. Versus, okay, tip the tailbone, I know everything is straight, allegedly, so just following the same plane, follow through with a cut. But there are a couple of reasons why, even to a white belt, I don't teach it that way. Because, take a look at what happens to both the left hand and the right, if I'm here. So left hand, absolutely no power. Look at the pinky's barely attached. And then the left hand, or the right hand, is just like holding back this way. It's not that powerful because again, my elbow's flared out. So if I'm here and I try to do a center cut, I have to do a lot of right hand, and by the time my left hand gains back control, I'm already done with the cut. So what I usually teach is from here, pulling it back. So almost like I'm trying to stab someone behind me, pull it back until you really can't anymore. And now this is your preparation for a center cut. So I usually say like, all right, so you want, again, almost like thrusting up on a 30-degree angle, or pi over 6, right? Or have the bottom of the hilt in line with your nose here. And when you cut, pinky, ring, middle, right? Extend out, almost like it's our long guard, right? It's almost like we're practicing with that into our cut. So again, a minor note to note with this as well. So the cut should be ending just below, so what the Federation says it should end below the belt, right? And I'm going to have a few things to talk about with that. If you end below the belt like this, right, it's going to be pretty hard for you to re-engage that left hand for that power. Versus if you end a little bit more out here, you're going to engage the left hand a little more to push forward into that arc. Because think about all the power you have to generate behind the sword, right? So if you're down here and trying to force your hands below your belt, or below your belt in order to finish that cut, you're going to be here and be like, right? As opposed to if you finish naturally here, you can use your left hand just to almost reverse that arc back up into another cut. So just keep that in mind. So the general wisdom of the basics is like, all right, so when you cut, you end below the belt. When you're in defense, your left hand, your both hands are above the belt. As when in terms of middle guard, because obviously that changes. You're doing low guards and stuff like that. But just keep that in mind, right? So the idea behind it is good. The idea is I want to fall through the body instead of just do a kendo cut here. I want to fall through the body and make sure I'm slicing through as opposed to merely cutting into the head. That's where we're pausing for part one. Just keep in mind again the aspects and the nitpicky things I mentioned, and try it with your basics. So those are your drills, right? Your drills are just going to be practice the basics with these concepts in mind. But with that, make sure you, first of all, so stay safe, stay humble, and keep training. Haidong!